So good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for coming to this webinar on creating accessible PowerPoint documents. Just a couple housekeeping things before we start. This webinar is brought to you by the Educational Technology Committee, ETC for short. The ETC is looking for volunteers to facilitate future webinar sessions. So if you are interested in facilitating a webinar for the winter 2019 term or even in the spring, feel free to go to www.edtechontario.ca and submit your proposal. The next thing I'd like to tell you about is the ETC committee also hosts the Advancing Learning Conference every year. And this year it will be from May 15th to May 17th at La Cité in Ottawa. So the website for that's not currently up, but keep an eye open for that information coming soon. Hello to everyone who has said hello to me in the chat window. Another thing, this webinar will be recorded and will be shared on the ETC website. Once that is up, I will be sending an email link to everyone who is registered for the webinar, so expect that in the next few days. Lastly, in terms of housekeeping things, if you could kindly turn off your microphone during the presentation. And if you have any questions, please do put them in the chat window and we'll get to them that way. Okay? All right. So as I said, this presentation is called Creating Accessible PowerPoint Documents. For those of you that don't know me, my name is Gina Catenazzo, and I work here at Humber College as a digital and multimedia graphic design specialist in the e-learning department. I work on creating online courses here, and I have a very keen interest in universal design, inclusive design, and accessibility. My colleague, John Paletti, will be assisting me today in this webinar, and he will be manning the chat window. So like I said, if you have any questions, please do put them in there, and John will flag them there for me, okay? So in this presentation today, what we'll be doing is we're going to be looking at some accessibility guidelines that are applicable to creating documents and that are applicable regardless of what type of software you're using. And then for the second part of the presentation, we'll actually be looking at things specific to PowerPoint, and I'll be doing some demoing in PowerPoint as well. So the learning outcomes for this presentation, we're going to review accessibility guidelines and recommendations. We're going to apply accessibility guidelines to a PowerPoint document. We're going to use features in PowerPoint to make documents accessible. And we're going to use what PowerPoint calls the accessibility checker. So PowerPoint and Word both have accessibility checkers in them, so I'll show you how to do that. Ooh, what happened there? Let's close that. Okay. So the BUZZ acronym for the last little while has been, and you've probably heard it, the AODA. We need to be AODA compliant. What AODA stands for is the Accessibility for Ontarians with Disabilities Act. This law is sets out a process for developing and enforcing accessibility standards. Ontario has committed to being a fully accessible province by 2025. It's quite amazing. Actually, we're kind of the leaders in this. No one is doing it to the extent that Ontario has decided to do it. And in order to comply with the AODA, there's sort of 5 key areas that Ontario has committed to. One of them is information and communications, and that's what creating accessible documents falls under. Two other important dates to remember are 2020. That's when all printed materials need to be accessible. And 2021 is when all web and digital content needs to be accessible. So in order to be AODA compliant, we follow what is called a set of standards by the World Wide Web Consortium. These are international standards called Web Content Accessibility Guidelines, or WCAG for short. There are 3 levels to the WCAG guidelines, A, AA, and AAA. So in order to be AODA compliant, we need to follow WCAG 2.0 level AA standards. We need to comply with A and AA standards. So everything that I'm going to be talking about today and the guidelines I'm talking about today either fall under the level A, AA standards, or they are recommendations from the Canadian National Institute for the Blind. Okay, so I'd like to gauge a little bit what kind of systems, operating systems, that you are all using. So if you could take a moment to go to www.menti.com and put in this code 889260 and just answer the question, what operating system do you use predominantly? I'll just give you a second to do that. I'm going to flip over there. Can you see the results? Yeah. Okay, so as I suspected, you are predominantly using PC computers and some Macs, a couple Mac users out there. So all the demoing I will be doing today will be on a PC. There will be a couple occasions when I flip over to a Mac to show you something. So I will be going back and forth from Mac to PC, or rather PC to Mac. So you'll see that sort of Twilight Zone-y screen and screen thing happen a few times. So don't freak out. Don't worry about it if that happens, because as I go from one screen to the other, that might happen. But yeah, so I will be doing the demos on PC. And when there are differences, because there are some differences in a Mac, I will point out what those differences are. Let's go back over here. Okay, so let's dive right in. So the first accessibility guideline that I'd like to look at is a guideline around text contrast ratio. So the color contrast of our text needs to be, to comply with AA standards, needs to be 4.5 to 1 for normal text, normal size text, and 3 to 1 for large size text. Large is considered 14 point, not bolded, 14 point bolded, or 18 point not bolded. So as you can see in the illustration provided, all the text on the left side of the screen is not accessible, whereas the text on the right side of the screen is accessible according to the guidelines. So you might ask me, well, how do I figure out what this contrast ratio is of the text that I'm using? There's this amazing, amazing app put out by the Pacello group. One thing I forgot to mention, I will also be sharing these PowerPoint slides on the ETC website, so you will have access to all these links that I've put into the presentation, and some of them are amazing, so I highly encourage you to download the slides once they're up. So this app created by the Pacello group here is amazing because I can open it over any site, anything, and I can check my color contrast. So on the bottom here of the app, it spells out the WCAG guidelines. So the first one is the one we need to comply with, the AA. AAA compliance is a much larger contrast ratio. It's actually 7:1. For AODA compliance, we don't need to comply with that, but we do need to comply with this first one, the 1.4.3 contrast. So the way that I use that is it's asking me to input a foreground color and a background color. So the foreground color would be my text. The background color would be whatever the color of your document is. Traditionally, in Word documents and potentially PowerPoint documents, your background is white, but it might not be. So the way I use it is I click on the little eyedropper tool here, and then this circle opens up, which will choose the color that I am looking at. So here I would hover over this white text, which I'm having a hard time doing right now. Let me see if I can. There we go. Okay, I kind of did it anyway. And then the background text, and click on that. So it'll show me in the WCAG guideline, it tells me I fail for large and regular text for this particular white and blue color. Now, similarly, if I want to check this other side here, I would click on the eyedropper again, hover over that text, and it shows me that the second one passes for large and regular size text for the WCAG guideline. This app is both PC and Mac compatible, so it is fantastic. I highly recommend you download it. It really reduces the workload because I've been checking the colors in the infographics I create for over a year now, but in a much more lengthy process, and this has reduced my workload considerably. Absolutely free app. Free, compatible with both Macs and PCs. It's amazing. It's pretty amazing. Okay. The next guideline I'd like to look at is emphasizing text. So if we want to emphasize text, we want to use bold to emphasize text. We do not want to depend on italics, underline, all caps, or color to differentiate text. I'm going to speak more specifically about underline and color. The reason we don't want to use underline, especially in a digital document, in a print document it's different, but in a digital document we don't want to use underline because someone might mistake that for a broken hyperlink, because traditionally hyperlinks, or the default anyway in PowerPoint and Word, is for hyperlinks to be underlined. So we don't want to use underline because that could be mistaken for a broken hyperlink by a student. The reason we don't want to use color to differentiate text is for those users that have visual impairment or color blindness. And I'll demonstrate that further in the next slide and another app I'm going to show you. So in this slide here, the sentences on the top are the same, and the sentences on the bottom are the same. And what's happening on the right side is there is this another amazing app, which I will actually demo live in a moment, that simulates color blindness. So I took a screenshot of it to show you. And so this particular type of color blindness is called monochromacy, where the person with color blindness can only see in black and white. So that person would have a very hard time understanding in this sentence, the first sentence in the top right corner, what's different about that sentence. However, it's easier for them with that word bolded to be able to see that difference. So I'm not saying that we shouldn't use color at all, but we shouldn't use color as the only method to distinguish text, to differentiate text. So if you want to use color, you can use color and bold, not by itself. So I just want to show you. So this is that app that I was telling you about in live. So again, it's amazing. It's an amazing app that you can actually drag onto anything on your screen. Unfortunately, though, it only is developed for Macs. It is not developed for PCs, but I will demo it for you. There are some other websites and applications for PCs where you can actually upload an image to it and it'll simulate color blindness for you. But in terms of an actual desktop app that you can float on top of your content, it's only developed for a Mac. So currently it's set to what's called normal vision. If I click on this little eye in the top right corner, it will show me 8 different kinds of color blindness. So if I click on and they're all very difficult to pronounce, but if I click on the first one, deuteranopia, it'll show you where the app is, what a person with that type of color blindness will see. So as you can see, in some of the colors, if I am someone that doesn't have this color blindness, type of color blindness, it's quite dramatic, the difference in the color. Just to show you another one, this one's called tritanopia, just to show you that difference. And then lastly, I'll just show you the monochromacy again. So I think really the takeaway here is how important it is to consider how we use color, especially to differentiate our content. And also consider the language we use. You know, for example, if we say, click on the green button, or if we say, make a list under the red word, something like that. We need to think about how we use language and color and how we use color to differentiate our content. Okay, let me go back. Okay. So the third accessibility guideline, which is also related to color, is how we use color with meaning. So specifically here, I'm talking about graphs and infographics. So do not use color as the only way of conveying information or meaning. Use color plus text or color plus shape in images or graphs. So I'll show you an example of that in the next slide. So if we look at these two graphs here, the graph on the left is considered inaccessible, whereas the graph on the right is considered accessible. Again, if we think about that learner who has color blindness, it would be very difficult for them to decipher the graph on the left with the legend, like the lines, to match up the lines with the legend. However, that same person, if they were looking at the graph on the right, they have more than one way of identifying that content. So with the line, you know, the hashed line styles and the labels on the lines, they're able to easily identify what the meaning of the legend, the content and the legend. Okay. Accessibility guideline number 4 that I'd like to look at, font. So we want to use, it is recommended by the Canadian National Institute for the Blind to use sans serif fonts. So what a sans serif font, if you compare, for example, Arial is a sans serif font, whereas Times Roman is a serif font. And so what a serif font is it's font that have little feet on them, like little feet on the bottom of like the T, for example. And sans serif fonts don't have those little feet. So it is recommended to use sans serif fonts for your digital documents. And the Canadian National Institute for the Blind has identified Arial and Verdana as 2 of the most accessible fonts for users. There is some heated debate around serif fonts, as heated as debates about font can be, about whether or not they are considered inaccessible. Some studies say they are, some studies say they're not. But the Canadian National Institute for the Blind suggests if you're going to use serif fonts, to only use them in titles and not for body copy. And then lastly, anything that's considered a decorative font, so like Amarillo, Apple Chancery, anything that's just, you know, really fancy or curvy, are not considered accessible. Okay, accessibility guideline number 5, images. So images need to have something that's called alternative text on them. So what alternative text is it's text that when a screen reader user, so someone who is blind has a screen reader and they read out the content on this PowerPoint slide, the alternative text will be read to that user. Alt text should be about the subject of the image, and it should include important content and meaning, what the meaning of that image is. If for some reason you need to describe something in much more detail, for example, a graph or an infographic, then you would provide a long description. You wouldn't put it in the alt text. Now, I've done some testing on some screen readers and also done some research on some screen readers, and screen readers will actually stop reading the alt text after 25 words. So you want it to be succinct and clear. So I'm going to show you, I'm going to actually demo how you put the alt text on the image. Now, actually, before I do that, so I have this image here in this PowerPoint presentation. I was wondering, maybe put it in the chat window. How would you describe this image? Have a think about that, and how would you describe the image that you see right here? Okay, so a cup of tea with flowers, teacup with warm liquid in it, green cup full of tea sitting beside flowers, white flowers laying on a table beside green teacup and saucer with some flowers on the saucer. So yeah, I mean, those are all good descriptions of this image. One thing I will also say is that context matters. So for example, if I was teaching a culinary course, it might be important for me to say cup of chamomile tea. However, if I'm teaching a course in historical China, then it might be important for me to say cup of tea in an 18th century cup, 18th century China cup, something like that. So the context of how I describe it is very important. Okay. Now we do want to avoid saying image of or picture of, because a screen reader automatically will say that when it hits this item. Okay, so I'm going to actually show you how to do it. So I'm going to escape out here and go to my document. So what I do is I select my image and I right-click on my image, and I go down to here where it says Format Picture. I click on that, and this window opens up on the side here. And I go to the third icon here, Size and Properties. Click on that, and I go down to Alt Text, and I click on that. And this will open up. So a note about this, different screen readers. So the most widely screen reader used out there is JAWS. And JAWS will read what is written in both the title and the description. However, there are some screen readers. There's a screen reader NVIDIA. There's another one called Windows Eyes. Those ones will only read what's in the description box and not the title box. So what I tell people is, if you're going to write something, definitely write something in the description, and in the title is optional. So I'm going to put in here, cup of tea, and that's it. So then I close the window there. And so now when a screen reader uses, a screen reader user, thank you, approaches this image, it will read out a cup of tea to that user. What about using a color in the alt text description? Is that advisable? I'm not exactly sure. Do you mean in this window? Oh, using a color. Oh, I see what you're saying. I would say if it's important to the context somehow, I would say yes, but I would say it's not generally advisable. But if it's important somehow, and I'm not sure, I can't think of an example where it might be important right now. Let's say an example of, cars speeding through a green light. It might be important in that case, right? To understand the context of the image that the person has broken the law by going through the green light. So in that situation, I would put the color. But generally, I don't think it's important or advisable if it's not important to the understanding of the context somehow. Okay. So the next guideline I'd like to look at is how we present hyperlinks. So we want meaningful text on hyperlinks. We want to avoid generic text like click here. And I have been guilty of this myself in the past, and there are many websites out there that you will visit that say click here, but it's not considered accessible. So the first two sentences, please visit https, etc. for more information, is not accessible. Click here for more information about the College of Dietitians is not accessible. The way we would write that accessibly is please visit the College of Dietitians website for more information, and we put the hyperlink on the words the College of Dietitians website. The reason we want to do this is because the screen, so for the first case, the screen reader will actually read out every single letter of that hyperlink. And that can be very frustrating for the user. And the second reason, for the second one, I actually have a little video. We're not going to watch the whole thing, but I have a video to demo what that looks like, of what happens there. So I'm going to show you. Oh, no. Bear with me. Just going over to the video. Here it is.
You can make hyperlinks more accessible by changing their display text to something more natural and meaningful. Just right-click the hyperlink on the page, then choose Edit Hyperlink.
Actually, wait. Sorry. Let's start that again. I was at the wrong spot.
If you have hyperlinks in your document, changing their display text to ordinary language can make them much easier to understand for users who rely on screen reading programs. Here's a typical URL in the text of a document. For a sighted user, this might seem fine, but if you rely on a screen reader or text-to-speech program, it might read out the URL one letter at a time, like this.
http://www.nps.gov/olem/planiar visit/lodging.htm link.
You can make hyperlinks more.
So as you can see, especially some hyperlinks that are very long, that would be very frustrating for a screen reader user. Now, in the context of this, the click here, I will show you what.
One last thing to keep in mind. When adding display text, avoid phrases like click here or learn more. People who rely on screen readers often browse a list of the article's links to get an idea of its content. If the display text for all those links is the same generic phrase, it could sound something like this.
Click here, link. Click here, link. Click here, link.
Not very helpful. For more on creating
Okay, so again, I just wanted to emphasize how important it is to put meaningful text on hyperlinks for screen reader users. Okay, so now we're going to talk about things specifically about PowerPoint. So for PowerPoint presentations, we want to avoid transitions and animations. Less is more. We want to give each title each slide a unique title. And you want to use built-in slide layouts and master slides. The last point I will be demoing more in a moment. Now, I've had a discussion with some faculty about the first point, avoiding transitions and animations. I got some faculty who really like to use animations for the delivery of content, and my suggestion for that is just to minimize your animation. So I don't think, PowerPoint has some fancy animations of, spinning and, flying in and all this kind of stuff. And I don't think you need to use any of those kinds. If you do want to use animations, just, as you're talking in your classroom where you want to just show the point you're talking about and then show the next point, I would just do a simple fade in or or just a very simple animation, and just, again, remember that less is more, okay? Okay, so I'm going to talk about 3 things specifically with PowerPoint and creating PowerPoint presentations. So 1, I'm going to talk about the accessibility checker. 2, we're going to talk about using built-in slide layouts and master slides. And then 3, we're going to talk about the reading order. And what I mean by that is you want to make sure that the screen reader user will be able to read the order read the slide in the order that you intended it. Okay, so for the accessibility checker on a PC, we go to File, check for issues, and then check accessibility. And once I do that, this window pops up on the right showing me issues with my document. So there's actually 3 sort of levels of issues: errors, warnings, and then tips. Errors and warnings are the things that we need to fix. Tips are some things that PowerPoint is saying, I'm not sure if something is, see you, Brian. I'm not sure if something's wrong here, but I think you should check it just to be safe. So again, for PC, it's under File, check for issues, check for accessibility. If you're using a Mac, the accessibility checker is actually under the Review tab. So you would click on Review. Okay. So what's great about this accessibility checker, once it has identified what's wrong, you can actually click on the item that's wrong and it'll jump to where those issues are. I'll just do that again. So it's telling me, for example, that my next slide is missing alt text and that I need to do that. I need to put that into the image. And I did that purposely, so we could demo that. But another thing I wanted to mention about the accessibility checker is it's a fantastic tool, but it is not the be-all and end-all. So what it can't tell me is it can't tell me if the color contrast of any of the items is correct. It can't necessarily tell me, like, if, you know, it's giving me some warnings about hyperlink text, but it's not necessarily telling me if that's the best text that should be in there. So we definitely need to understand the accessibility guidelines and apply those guidelines to our documents. And then the accessibility checker is kind of our backup. I'll just click. So for example, it's telling me unclear hyperlink text, content placeholder 2. So if I click on that, so for example, this here, www.menti.com, technically is not accessible. Similarly, my citations are not accessible. And that's one place, that's one discussion that actually I have a lot with people, is currently APA citations are technically not accessible for many reasons. It actually doesn't comply with a number of the accessibility guidelines. But the expectation is that I use APA citations when I'm citing work. So that is the one place where I break the rules. And I would prefer not to do that, but again, so maybe at some point, I don't know, maybe APA will put out a new way of citing content, who knows, but just be mindful of that, and similarly, be mindful of that, and if you have someone, a student in your class that is using a screen reader, that we might have to provide those citations to them in a different way. Just, that's a side note. Okay, so I want to demo the built-in slide layouts and master slides. So the reason we want to do that, the reason we want to use the built-in slide layouts and master slides is because our document needs to have structure so that the screen reader can see that, for example, PowerPoint presentations demo is the title. So the screen reader can see that there's a list of content here. So the screen reader can see that there's an image, for example. So the way that I use built-in slide layouts and master slides is if I want to insert a new slide into my document, I use this tab here, the new slide. If I click on that, you'll see a number of pre-formatted designs for my document. So if I wanted to put in a slide with a title and content, I would click on that, and you'll see this sort of generic slide comes in here. And then I can click into it, write a title, oops. And this title and content will be of the same format of the rest of my document. Now, similarly, like if I want to actually change, let's say I change my mind. I'm like, oh no, actually, I don't want it to be like that. I want it to be a different layout. So I can click on this layout tab and change it. So maybe I wanted to have 2 columns of content. So I go there and I click on that. Okay, so that is using the slide masters. So we're using, the slide layouts. When we insert a slide, we click on new slides, and to change the layout of a slide, you would click on layout. Now, let's say I want to change the color or of my title, for example. What I want to do is I want to use master slides to design my content. So if I go to view and this icon here, slide master, I click on that. Here you'll see the actual, what they're called master slides, the master document that it is pulling from here. And I actually have two types of master slides here. I have this sort of white one, and then I have this Humberized master slide that I used. So let's say I want to, I don't know, make my titles, you know, blue now, and of course, you know, color is not the only way that we're going to emphasize, right? But let's say I want to make them blue, and I'm just doing this for, you know, just for presentation's sake, and I want to change the font. If I do that and I go back to my presentation, now you'll see that all the titles have changed according to my master slides. So this is really helpful. Also, if you need to change something in your presentation, you don't have to go through every single slide and do it. If you go into your master slides and just change it in your master slide, it will change throughout your presentation. So let's take that off because I don't want that. Okay, so when we're creating slides, that's what we need to do. We need to create slides, create our design in the master slides, and then when we insert new slides, we put in new slides, et cetera, et cetera. Okay? Sure, Lisa, I can do that. So to create your master slides, I go to View, click on View, and 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. The 6th icon over is called Slide Master. I click on that. And here is where I would design my slides and change colors and select fonts and basically styling it. Okay. And then that will carry over into my document. And then when I want to insert new slides, right, my two slide master designs are here. So like if I wanted to insert one of these Humber slides, I can do that. And it'll just go into the document, and then I just add my content. Okay. So I'm just going to delete these slides for now because they're not actually part of my presentation. What's the question? Oh, Nikki, are other citation styles accessible? Sorry, I didn't see that. I don't know 100% the answer to this, but I'm going to assume no, because in the citation styles that I've seen, especially if we're citing from the web, we're expected to provide the entire hyperlink in that citation from the styles I've seen or that I know and use. As well, often citations will have italics in them, And so both of those things are not considered compliant under the guidelines. So I'm going to guess that probably most of the citation styles that are out there are not accessible. You're welcome. Okay, so the last thing I wanted to demo with PowerPoint is something called reading. Actually, I'm going to demo two more things. Something called reading order, okay? So what I did is I just duplicated this other slide and I put a new picture in there. So currently, so the way that we would like the student to read this is the title first, and then the bullet points, you know, and then the image. That's how I would like the student to read it. So the way I check that is if I'm on the Home tab and I go to this icon close towards the right of the screen called Arrange, if I click on that, I can open up something called Selection Pane. So if I open that up, this new window pops open at the right called Selection. This is showing me the content that is on my slide. Now, something that PowerPoint does, which I hope that they change one day, but it actually reads from bottom to top. So as you can see, the title is on the bottom, then I see content placeholder, etc. So it's reading from bottom to top. Another thing that, another way you can check how your slide is being read, if I'm actually have the slide selected and I use the tab key, you'll see it will select your content in the order that it's being read. So again, if I select my slide and I use the tab key, you'll see that the title is highlighted first. Then the bullet point content is highlighted next. Then my citation is highlighted, and then my image is highlighted. And you'll see as I'm doing those tabs, the different content types in the selection pane get highlighted as well. So it's going from bottom to top. Now let's say I want to change the order of something, because I personally would prefer that it reads the alt text on the image before reading the citation. So the way I do that is I can go to this selection pane and I can just drag my content in the order that I want it to be read. So now when I'm doing the tab, it goes to the image first and then the citation. Okay. One more thing that I wanted to show you is I had mentioned this point about this on the slide earlier, to have unique titles for each of your slides. So I'm just going to duplicate this slide just to show you what happens. So in my accessibility checker, so let me duplicate it, duplicate slide. All of a sudden I get this new error. This error wasn't, I guess you couldn't see it before because it was so long, but I get this new error and it says duplicate slide title. So if I change this, because it's telling me two of the titles in your presentation are the same. If I alter it, let's say I call it reading order 2, that error goes away, or that tip goes away. So another thing that's great about the accessibility checker, as you fix the things wrong in your document, it will clean up in the accessibility checker. Does this have to be done slide by slide, or can it be done through the master? Yeah, okay, so Loyalist College asked the question, does this have to be done slide by slide, or can it be done through the master? Yes, you can check the reading order in the master slides, and that's another reason to use the master slides, because then it'll be predetermined. Those reading orders will be predetermined. I like to check, I like to go through and check the slides individually, because what happens is, you might use your master slide and then, I don't know, you might change something, or something happens as things go along. And then I just like to double check personally. But yes, that's one of the reasons we want to use the master slides, so that setup is done for you already. Okay, so that's the end of my presentation. I have a slide here with a number of resources, and like I said, I will be providing this PowerPoint presentation on the ETC website for download. So I highly recommend you download it and use some of these amazing tools that I've talked about. We still have a few minutes, so if anyone has any questions, I am open to answering some questions. You're welcome. You're welcome, everyone. And please do, if you do have any questions that come up later, or as you're working on your PowerPoint presentations and you can't think of how to do something, feel free to email me at the email at the beginning of the document, my PowerPoint presentation, and I am happy to answer any questions that come up for you as you explore your accessible PowerPoint journey. Oh, so what do I do? Nicole, did you have a question? If you want, at this point, if people want to open up their microphones, they're welcome to do that and answer questions verbally, or type it into the window. Okay. Yeah, absolutely. So the question is, can we share the documents with other faculty that were unable to attend? Yep. They will be put on the ETC website, and the recording link will also be on the ETC website, free for anyone to download and look at. I will be, once it's up on the website though, I will be sending out an email to everyone who has registered for this to let you know that it's there. But yeah, you're welcome to share and spread the word about accessible PowerPoint documents. You're welcome. I agree. From Loyalist. Yeah, I think, sometimes we think implementing accessibility is difficult, and it's actually not that difficult. A lot of things are not that difficult, and it's just about changing our perspective on something, or changing the way we do something. And once we change to this new way, it's actually not too difficult. So I agree, and especially some of the tools make things a lot easier, for sure. Okay. So if there's no more questions, I think we will shut this down. So thank you again for joining my presentation, and I look forward to conversing with you in the future about accessibility. I will. I'll do more presentations. Thank you. Okay. So I don't even know.